Anyway, so this tale is the tale of Dinkum Dirtwash Fossiljack, and kind of how she got that nickname Fossiljack. Now Dinkum, a young half-elven woman with brunette hair, emerald eyes, and quirky personalities, to say the best, hungered for knowledge and worked in a museum, or the entity known as the museum, which collected oddities across the land. One day, she found a scroll that gave her insight and a path to knowledge that would pull from the ancient strings of history itself, and those who lived it. Now, to do this, she would need 3 ingredients: moss root from a lich's lair, iron from the mines of Sen, as well as a blue phoenix feather. Now, she was able to collect the moss from the tomb of Temet Na down south in Etiqua, as well as happening upon some bandits that did a little bit of shady dealings, but had the iron she was looking for. Now, the blue phoenix feather is rarer than any other phoenix in its own right. To do this, she knew that one place had it: the Death Market. Unfortunately, it's a place called the Death Market, so it's not the nicest of places. But she made it there, and that's a story for another time. But after acquiring her blue phoenix feather, she forged a lantern-like item, combining the moss and the feather inside. And with the help of nature, she would be able to raise the dead and talk to them and learn the history that they lived. Now to find the perfect fossil. Perhaps a giant blue salamander to start.
This is the story of a Miss Fossilcheck. She was employed in an entity known as the museum. She, amidst her work, discovered a secret scroll that would lead her to forbidden knowledge. Inside of this scroll, she found that she required 3 ingredients in order to make her dreams come true. She had to gather moss from a lich's lair, iron from mountains in a far-off land, and a rare blue phoenix feather. Now, traveling down south, she found her way to the lich's lair, found the moss. In her travels to the mountains to the north, she happened upon several bandits who gave her a rough time, but dispatching them, she found the iron. And finally, in order to get the rare, precious blue phoenix feather, she had to go to the Death Market. A pleasurable place, obviously, considering it is the Death Market. But through her searching and risking of her own life, she managed to find and acquire the blue phoenix feather. Having collected all the ingredients, she could now read the rest of the scroll. Combining the moss and the phoenix feather inside of an iron lantern she crafted, she created a spell to raise the dead, allowing her to speak to the dead and gather all of their previous knowledge.
This is the story of one Miss Fossilcheck, who found employment at an entity called the museum. During her studies there, she found a scroll to a powerful magic, which required 3 ingredients to cast: moss from a witch's lair, iron from faraway mountains, and a rare blue phoenix feather were all required for the spell. One day, Miss Fossilcheck decided to head off to gather these ingredients. She was able to acquire the moss from the witch's lair, and while in the mountains in a faraway land, bandits gave her some trouble, but ultimately she was able to acquire the iron she needed. Finally, the search for the rare blue phoenix feather took her to the Death Market, whose name implies a very enjoyable time, as one could guess. Ultimately, she was able to acquire the feather and put the moss and iron into an iron lantern. The spell was able to be cast, and which allowed her to communicate with the dead and acquire the knowledge of the people she communicated with. This was the story of Miss Fossilcheck.
This is the story of one Miss Fossilcheck, who, during her studies, found employment with an entity called the Museum. During those studies, she discovered a scroll to an ancient magic, very powerful, and it required 3 components: moss from a witch's lair, iron from the mountains of a faraway land, and a rare blue phoenix feather. While it took time, she was able to acquire the moss from the witch's lair. Hi, thank you. And with a little bit of trouble from bandits, easily enough, she was able to get the iron from the faraway land. Hi, I know. And the feather search took her to the Death Market, which is an enjoyable place, as the name implies. With a little bit of searching, ultimately she was able to acquire the rare blue phoenix feather and tried her hand at casting the spell. The moss and iron were crafted into an iron lantern, and the blue feather placed inside to allow her to speak with the dead and acquire their knowledge and help her on her future journeys.
This is a story of one Miss Fossilcheck, who found herself employment with an entity known as the Museum. During her studies there, she found an ancient scroll, and on that scroll was instructions to make a powerful magical artifact. It required 3 components: moss from a witch's lair, iron from a mountain in a faraway land, and a rare blue phoenix feather. With some searching, she went to the witch's lair and received the moss. She then, after traveling a long distance, was able to get iron from a faraway land off the mountain. And finally, she found the rare blue phoenix feather at the Death Market. And together the moss and the iron were forged into a lantern, and the blue phoenix feather was placed inside. And she, with the blue phoenix feather, tried to cast the spell, and she used it to speak with the dead, and then, in turn, learn their knowledge and help her on her studies and her journey.
All right, so this is a story about a lady named Miss Fossilcheck who worked for a place called the Museum. During her studies at this place, she came across a scroll which was, it said something about a recipe for an ancient artifact. So this ancient artifact required some moss, some iron from a faraway land, and a blue phoenix feather. And so she went to a witch's house to get the moss, and then obviously she got the iron from a faraway land, and then she found the blue phoenix feather from out of nowhere, apparently. And then what she did with all of these things when she found them is she combined the moss and the iron into a lantern. And then I guess she just put the feather inside and she used it to talk to the dead. Yeah.
Once upon a time, there was a woman named Mrs. Fosseljunk. She was a museum curator and she worked at a museum much like this one. One day, as she was setting up a new display, she came across an ancient scroll, and when she opened it, she found a recipe for a very unique magic ancient item. In order to create this magic ancient item, she needed a lot of very specific ingredients. First, she went to the witch's hut to collect some of her magic moss. Then she traveled to a faraway land to collect some iron, presumably from dwarves. Finally, she had to collect a blue phoenix feather. We're not sure where she got that. That page was ripped out of her diary. Once she had all of these pieces, she returned to her museum and put them together. She created a lantern from the iron from the faraway mountains. She used the moss as fuel, and then she lit it with the phoenix feather. Once the lantern was lit, it was super cool and awesome and did super cool, awesome things that I can't tell you about. The end.